What does the day in the life of a service desk analyst actually look like? For those of you who are new, my name is Dan, and I work at an MSP, Managed Service Provider. So what that means is that my company provides IT services to other companies. And the difference between an MSP and traditional in-house IT or corporate IT is that we work with many clients at the same time, right? Different companies we support simultaneously. But someone working in in-house IT, they're just supporting the one company that they work at. But for us, it's a bit more hectic in the sense that we're dealing with various environments, various clients, and different nuances. So in this video, I'm going to be taking you into a typical day for me, and I'm going to give you 5 real tickets that I've actually worked on recently. These are real tickets that I've actually had to deal with real customers. For those of you who are interested in getting in IT, this is going to be very insightful. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get straight to it. So the very first ticket that I've dealt with recently is a Microsoft 365 account lockout. Now this is very common. People get locked out of their accounts, they forget their password, they type in the wrong password one too many times. This is pretty common. You have to unlock their account, you have to reset their password. Basically what happened is that a ticket came in the service desk, that ticket was assigned to me. What I did is I ended up calling the user. Now, of course I could have emailed the user, but I called the user because what I've come to find out is that emailing users typically extends the process. And what I mean by that is that sometimes, okay, you email a user and then they respond, but then maybe whatever they responded, it wasn't clear enough. So then you ask another question, you send them an email, and then they have to respond. And then you're playing this email tag back and forth, and it takes forever. And sometimes it can span days. So what was recommended to us by management is to always call the user. So I called this particular user and I said something along the lines of, hey, this is Dan from such and such company who received a ticket made by you. It looks here you're having issues with your account. You can't get in. Is that correct? And the user was like, yeah, I don't understand. Like, I know my password, bro. Like, this is stupid. Like, I don't understand why this is not working, Well, what happens is a lot of times they feel like they know things, but in reality, they just forgot their password. Before I even did anything, the very first thing that I did was verify this user's identity. And the reason why I did that is because you don't want to just assume that the person that you're talking to is actually the person that you think they are, right? A lot of times what hackers will do is that they'll do something called social engineering, where they'll pretend to be an individual and then they'll pretend to be in need of help. And if you don't verify their identity, then they can, eventually, take over their account because you relay sensitive information to them. So what I did first is I asked this user questions that they should know. If they are the employee that they say they are, they should know their employee ID, they should know their manager's name, they should know, the phone number associated with their account and different things like that, right? Because it is them. If what they're saying doesn't align with what I have in my records, then I know that something suspicious is going on. But in this instance, the user was the person that they said that they were. So after that, I went to the company's Azure tenant and I looked for the user in question. Once I found their user account, like Brad Brown or something like that, the very first thing that I did is I checked the sign-in logs associated with their user account just to kind of verify that they indeed were experiencing an account lockout, because the sign-in logs would give you multiple failed instances of a failed logon, right? So I looked at that and I seen, yes, this user had tried to log in multiple times and it didn't work. So what they needed was their account to be unlocked and then their password to be reset. But because this user was part of a hybrid environment, what I had to do, instead of resetting their password here in the Azure tenant, I had to go to Active Directory on premises. And if that kind of doesn't make sense what I'm saying, basically when it comes to like identities and user accounts, like if it's hybrid, then that means that the user account is in 2 different places. It's in the cloud, but it's also on premises on this server. So you have to go back to the place where it originated from and that Active Directory server, and then you have to make the changes there, and then you have to synchronize those changes with the Azure tenant, the Azure cloud environment, just so it works properly. Once I confirmed the issue, I went to the Active Directory server, I unlocked the account, I reset the user's password, I triggered a sync so the changes could apply from Active Directory to the Azure tenant. Once the sync was completed, I shared the new credentials with the user securely, right? Typically you want to do it via email and encrypt that email. And then I asked the user to try to log in. And I asked them to share their screen so I could see if it was actually working as it should. And the user was successfully able to log in. So this ticket wasn't too difficult, right? It was one of the easier tickets, but this is a common thing that you'll see. People get locked out of their account, it happens, right? So yeah. So the second kind of ticket that I've dealt with recently is a user reporting that they couldn't access a website. First and foremost, before I even tried to troubleshoot the reason why they couldn't access that website, I had to go confirm with this particular company's IT point of contact. Because the IT point of contact, he's the one that allows or denies things, right? Because I don't want to just allow a user to access a website, but then that's not a website that's corporately allowed. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I had to email him, reach out to him, confirm that he actually approved. And then once he approved, that's when I went back to this user and I gave him a call to assist him with this issue. Typically, when I see something like this, I start with basic troubleshooting. Number one, do they have a basic internet connection, right? Is it only this website they can't access or all websites in general? So I told him to go on Google and search up youtube.com or some other random website. And in this instance, they actually could access other websites. So I was like, okay, they can access other websites, but they can't access this one. I then asked the user what kind of browser they were using, right? And they said they were using Edge, right? So I was like, okay, can we test this issue in Google Chrome just to see if it only is this browser or a different browser? But in this instance, the user said that they couldn't do that because the company policy was to only allow Edge to be the main browser and you couldn't use any other browsers. I was like, okay. What I did then was I told the user to clear their browser cache and I kind of directed them in doing that. But after we did that, I noticed that it didn't work. So I was like, okay, let's dig a little deeper. I want to see what their current IP configuration looks like. So what I did is I opened up the command prompt, and I'm getting a little technical here for those of you who are not that technical, but bear with me, and type in the command ipconfig. So what that does is kind of lets me know, okay, what's the IP address of the system, what's the subnet mask, what's the default gateway, what's the DNS server, yada, yada, yada. So I looked at their IP configuration. It didn't seem off. It was like 10.200. something. And that seems pretty normal. And the reason why I know that's normal is because of subnetting, and that's another explanation for another video. IP configuration seemed to be fine. I told the user to type a ping command to kind of see if I could reach that website. And when I sent the ping command, it sent back replies. So that let me know that it could reach that website. I tried to test DNS, right, to make sure that DNS resolution was working as it should. And DNS was working fine as well. So I was like, this is confusing. Everything looks pretty normal from the workstation side, so it might be some sort of network restriction. Maybe there's some sort of firewall that's blocking the outbound connection, because it's not happening with any other website. It's just this website in particular. But since firewall reviews are out of the scope of tier 1 support, I decided to escalate the ticket at this point. And they tell us that, as service desk analysts, our job is not to resolve every single ticket. Our job is to just triage, take notes, take screenshots, kind of start to get an idea of what may be going on. But if we can't resolve it, we escalate to tier 2. And that's exactly what I've decided to do. So the third kind of ticket that I've dealt with recently, Microsoft 365 license error in Word. Now, honestly, I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the more difficult cases that I actually dealt with. Essentially, what was going on is that a user was trying to access the Word desktop application on their computer, but whenever they would open up Word and try to open up like a blank document, it would say that, hey, like you don't have a Microsoft 365 license assigned, you need one assigned so that you can edit files and begin to use Word. So this ticket was put in on behalf of the user by ITPOC. So I didn't really need approval or anything like that. So the very first thing that I wanted to do is see, okay, does this user have a Microsoft 365 license assigned to their user account? So I went to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center and I seen that the user did indeed have a Microsoft 365 license already assigned. So I was like, that's kind of weird. Okay. Is it actually active? And yes, it was. So then I hopped on a call with the user and I tried to do some basic troubleshooting. Maybe it's just a glitch or something. So let's sign you out of Word, but then let's sign you back in, right? I wanted to refresh the authentication. The error, unfortunately, was still there. After that, I went to the Windows Credential Manager and I removed the saved Microsoft Office credentials. Well, what happened is that sometimes Office stores cache login credentials and clearing them can fix authentication and licensing issues. So I removed that and I told the user to kind of reboot the system. We rebooted the system, came back on, and then I was like, okay, did it work? No, unfortunately, it still didn't work. So at this point, I started looking at the device itself, right? Is there something wrong with the device itself? Maybe it's not even a licensing issue. So I checked the device to see if it was in a compliant state, right? Because typically, like in a corporate environment, devices are set to have like a baseline and how they should be set up and how they should be, right? So if they don't meet that baseline, then they're not compliant. So I went into a platform called Intune, and Intune kind of let me know if this device was compliant or non-compliant. And I found out that the device actually wasn't compliant. I was like, all right, why is it not compliant? And I discovered that Windows real-time protection was turned off on the computer. Windows real-time protection is the core Microsoft antivirus software. It's like the default one. So if that's turned off, it kind of thinks, okay, the device has no security. And in this environment, the device had to meet certain security requirements to be considered compliant. So I was like, okay, why is this off? And I came to find out that the reason why this was off is that it was using another security software called CrowdStrike, and that was taking precedence over that. So at this point, what I decided to do is I decided to reach out to the IT point of contact for this company, and I informed them of this. And I said, okay, the device is not compliant. Windows real-time protection is off. CrowdStrike is on. Maybe this is why there's licensing issues because the device is not compliant. Can we disable CrowdStrike? Is that okay? And ITPOC was like, yeah, you can disable it. It shouldn't actually even be there, at least anymore. That's what he said, because it's something that they used before, but they don't use anymore. I went to go disable CrowdStrike, and after I disabled CrowdStrike, Windows real-time protection came back on, and then I checked Intune, and I seen that the device was considered now compliant. So I was like, okay, we made some progress. If it's compliant now, it should work, right? And unfortunately, it still didn't work, right? It still gave the same error. So at that point, I was super confused. I was like, I don't even know what's going on here. Like, what is happening here? So I decided to then, escalate the issue once again, just like the other ticket, because it required further investigation. Things that seem simple sometimes are not always simple as they seem. Sometimes the simple things actually become complex, right? And this was one of them. The fourth kind of ticket that I had to deal with recently was a Duo multi-factor authentication logon failure, right? If you don't know what Duo is, it's a multi-factor authentication software that provides a second form of verification for the user when they log in, maybe to their Outlook or just log into the system in general, right? So if Duo is enabled, then basically, the user will enter the username and their password, but then a Duo prompt will come on and say, okay, you need a second form of verification, maybe like a code or something. You can get that code from the Duo app on your mobile phone, and then once you put that in, it lets you log in if it's correct. So this user couldn't log in to their computer because Duo was failing. So I called the user, and what I decided to do was to remote into their system, because their system was actually managed by our MSP. So we use a remote management tool called VSA. So I remoted into their system, and then I seen what they were seeing on their login screen. And I told them to try logging in so I can see what happens. The error message that appeared was a bad timestamp error. I didn't really know what this meant, so I searched it up on Google. I did some Google foo. Ha! Oh man, that was kind of cringy, I'm not gonna lie. And it said that the bad timestamp error happens because the system's clock is out of sync, right? It's not what it should be. And Duo needs time to be on point and correct and in sync, otherwise it won't be able to authenticate the user, right? So I did more research, and mind you, I was still on a call with the user actively, but I told him, give me a quick second. And that's okay, right? That's okay. I do want to mention that it's okay to not know everything. You're not supposed to know everything. No person is going to be smart enough to know everything, and it's okay to search things up even while working with the user. As long as you kind of keep them informed, you're respectful and polite, then people don't really care. So from what I was reading, I believe the reason why the system clock was out of sync was because of a weak or dying CMOS battery. And that's something that's an internal component in the computer's motherboard. I'm not going to get into that because it's like a whole explanation. Here in the service desk, we use something called knowledge base articles. And knowledge base articles are kind of resources that other techs wrote that kind of detail how to solve a problem. And it's useful for future service desk analysts, because now if we run into the same issue, we can just read that knowledge base article and see what they did. So somebody wrote a particular knowledge base article about this, and I looked at it, and there was a script that you could run in VSA to kind of solve this issue. So I came out of the remote session, and then I went to the VSA settings for this particular host, and then I ran that script. And then after I ran that script, what I told the user to do is just reboot their system. So they restart and they reboot their system. And then after that, the login screen came back. And I told them to, put their password. Duo came up, and it prompted them to enter a code. They entered that code, and it worked because the system's clock was now properly synchronized. That one wasn't too bad. That one actually wasn't too bad. It was, pretty fairly easy. But what I did tell the user at the very end after they logged in was make sure you reach out to your internal IT point of contact and see if they can look into potential CMOS battery that's weak, and see if they can get that replaced potentially, because that would probably prevent this from happening again. And then after that, I closed out the ticket. So the fifth and final ticket that I worked on recently is onboarding a user user into an Azure Virtual Desktop. Now, if you don't know what an Azure Virtual Desktop is, it's kind of like a desktop that's hosted in the cloud. So it's a virtual machine. It's as if you had another computer without it actually being there physically with you, right? But you're able to access it. The reason why a client would use an Azure Virtual Desktop is because they want to have that isolation. Because maybe a user might bring their own laptop as per the bring your own device policy of the company, but they would gain access to the Azure Virtual Desktop from their laptop, and then anything company related, company data, company files, anything that was important, the work that they were doing for the company would strictly be done in that desktop. So there's that security and isolation. So this is pretty common. I get tons and tons of onboarding requests working the service desk. The way that I went about it is I opened this particular ticket. I read the instructions. Typically with onboardings, what the client will do is that they'll send you like an Excel spreadsheet with user details, like how they want you to create this particular user for this new hire, how they want the properties of the user account, what groups they want the user to be in, what licenses they want assigned to this particular user account. All I did was kind of just read this document and then apply it in their environment. So I went into their Active Directory server. I created a user account for, let's say, Todd James. It's a fake name. I set it up the way that they wanted. After that, I synchronized Todd James' user account to the cloud. And then once it's in the cloud, the user account was set up with everything. And after that, what I would do is send an email to the user, because the company would give me like a secondary email that I can use to send information to that particular person. I would send them their new credentials. I would send them a PDF with instructions on how to access the AVD, and then they would kind of go about that process. And of course, if they needed any assistance, I kind of wrote down, hey, like you can call me at this number and I'll help you out in real time. Some users, they need help. Other users, they kind of figure it out. Depends, because not everybody is tech savvy. But the one thing with onboarding tickets is that they take a little bit of time, because you might send the credentials to the user and the instructions, but they may not look at it until days later, for whatever reason, right? So I find myself having to reach out, having to say, hey, like, did you see my email? Did you get this? Were you able to get set up? Did you get into the environment? Yada, yada, yada. So this kind of ticket compared to other tickets, it can take a while. And our company says that it's okay if it takes some days, you know, because we do have, you know, SLAs, and we do want to close tickets in a relatively quick manner, but with onboardings, it's different. These are the kinds of things that you will deal with in the service desk. But I think the cool thing about working in service desk is that you gain really strong foundational understanding of just, you know, infrastructure and the basics of troubleshooting that will then carry over, you know, working in the cloud, right? Cloud engineer, cybersecurity, whatever. It kind of builds off of that. So that's pretty much it. You know, I hope that this video was insightful. I hope that this video gave you some context and ideas. And yeah, so you guys stay tuned. I'll be making more videos very soon here. And Dan again signing out.